before now, second time around, so we doing it in style. It's all elite, not accepting defeat. A lot can change in 1 year, but more can change in 1 week. Believe the hype, the train's leaving tonight, hit the throttle. We headed straight to Chicago, it's only getting better, this is our future endeavor. I can't wait to see the fight between Pac, Kenny, Omega. It's bound to be killer, the winner have to consider. It will all be over quicker, deliver the V-trigger. It's picking up, Lucha Bros versus Young.
Welcome back, All Elite family, to another exciting edition of the All Elite podcast. As always, I am your host, All Elite Andy, and I'm joined by my boy, wrestling fan, anime nerd, All Elite AJ. AJ, how are things going?
Things are going all right. I'm getting over my cold. Everything's going good. I'm just back to writing.
That's good to hear, man. Our boy is finally done being sick, kicked that illness. Good to hear. Really hasn't been a very busy week for myself. Just been busy working, getting a lot of the Christmas stuff set up. As you can see, I got my tree set up in the background. All of those fun and fancy things, getting ready for all of that. But otherwise, really haven't been up to a lot. And it really hasn't been a very busy week for AEW in general. It's been a pretty slow news week. One of the bigger or more interesting cases of news, I guess I should say, is that AEW will be opening the show up this week commercial-free, combating NXT's official announcement of doing the same thing with their opening NXT Championship match with Adam Cole and Finn Balor. This is somewhat of a direct reaction, some would say. Cody and them have been claiming they wouldn't directly react or try and make any sudden changes based upon their match card compared to what WWE is doing, but when you're making blatant announcements like this, it seems to be just a direct reaction once again.
Yeah, I don't know how else you could swing it. They're definitely being reactionary, but I don't really see that as a bad thing other than it being hypocritical, but it's something where I assume this would happen anyways. I'm not that surprised or shocked by it. Not this specific instance, but them reacting to what NXT is doing in general.
Yeah, and it does make sense. And honestly, the biggest reason to me that it's maybe not it's not a problem, but it's weird, is because they almost open up every show the first 30 minutes or so without a commercial anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that fans have sort of figured that out, and making an announcement like that is essentially your direct reaction. Maybe not even the action itself, because again, as I said, it's something they've done for weeks, but when you're making an announcement like this, that's your direct reaction to what NXT has going on. And you can't blame them. A hot start for NXT, so you want to have a hot start for AEW, opening up with Kenny Omega and Hangman taking on, who was it, LAX or Proud and Powerful?
I thought it was Lucha Bros.
You are correct. I knew I was off there. Facing off against the Lucha Brothers, so a pretty high-profile tag team match. But I also think that it was tough to compete with that match that they have on NXT. So I think you kind of have to pull out all the stops in that circumstance, because that's Finn Balor versus Adam Cole. Any fan of professional wrestling, especially almost this culture of professional wrestling where you've seen Finn and Adam square up with the Elite or against the Elite, like things like this. So it's interesting just the way that they're trying to react to that. Obviously, last week AEW and NXT gaining the same rating. I'm not sure of the exact number, somewhere in the high 700,000 range. Both essentially just edging each other out in almost every demographic, all of those things. So it's totally been a pretty interesting race here, and I wonder how we're going to close out the year, because these year-end ratings are going to be pretty impactful. They're going to mean something for the next 3 weeks probably, because we don't have any wrestling next week. The following week we just have AEW, so it's very easy to give the edge to AEW that week, and then it'll be 3 weeks until we're really discussing something like this again.
Yeah. It's kind of surprising how, I don't know, neck and neck it is, but not just that. They both kind of hit low numbers, and I know there was a Spectrum outage, and there was an NBA game on, and the impeachment hearing, so I know there was a lot to do with those low numbers, but I'm still surprised that it was only in the 700s. I thought it would be around 800,000. That was my biggest takeaway. Not even that they tied, because as amazing as that is, it kind of rubbed away from me the awe of that, the fact that they actually tied, which is insane. But I don't know. It's been a few days now since we've known about it, so I can't go, oh my God.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and it is kind of telling. I was kind of on the same page with you, because I don't really ever look at the individual numbers per se. I kind of look at it as a whole number and want to see how many people are just tuned in that week. And it was pretty low when you look at it in that scale, probably about 1,500. At one point, we were nearly at 3 million people on that first week, so, or at least 2.5 million, 2 million. So they were getting really high numbers just in terms of engagement of pro wrestling fans in general. And it's obvious that there really hasn't been anything to make fans who aren't like diehards really stick to what's going on. And it's a fair notion with AEW's product. It hasn't necessarily been terrible or bad even. It's been really good in a lot of cases, but in other circumstances it has not been necessarily that alternative I think many were expecting, maybe more of like a real fight MMA feel, as opposed to now we're kind of more of an entertainment company in and of itself, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
So, but nonetheless, an interesting note there, just that they'll be opening up commercial free. It's something I've noticed every week though in general, so just the announcement there was interesting. Another interesting thing worth talking about, those smaller attendance at Dynamite over the past couple weeks, notably this past week. There were quite a few pictures floating around on social media. It was a little bit apparent during the show, too. If you were looking for that kind of thing, you could tell that the hard cam section was pretty barren. That entire half of the arena almost was pretty empty. It's worth noting because the crowd seemed hot. It seemed like a really great venue. I had noted that on social media from the scene that we had for coming from the hard cam of the other side. Everything looked great. They looked like they were pretty stacked. And then you get these pictures on social media and you see that only tells half the story. We get Cody Rhodes, who responds to these weak numbers, says they were about 80% full, had nearly 5,000 in attendance, and it wasn't really something they were worried about, and they planned on running that market again, which is fair because it was a hot crowd. It was a great crowd for what they did have. My biggest thing is you just see those arenas filled like that, and as a fan, it always comes off as a little hokey. So you'd rather just see them run smaller venues and make it like a need to be involved thing.
I agree. If they just hit smaller venues, it would look a lot better. It would sound a lot better, and it would just be. I understand why, because they want to be able to make the tickets affordable. And if you do small venues, you're not able to deliver on that. But at a certain point, you have to say, well, we're not selling out the shows, and we're having to taper off a big section of our crowd. What do we do? And the answer is run smaller venues. But aside from that, I get their strategy, and I get that they're happy with the tickets because, as I recall, the tickets sold out, but they just or not sold out, but they sold well. And so it's a lot of times people buying the tickets and trying to resell them, or people who can't go, or this and that and the other. So it's definitely a confusing or conflicting situation where you want to be able to give people an affordable option to go to your show, but you also need to fill the arena.
If you ask me, they really should have started out really light. Maybe, I'm not saying the smallest of arenas, but like maybe even the smallest of arenas in terms of like 4,000 to 6,000 seat venues from the beginning. Make it like a supply and demand thing where people are struggling to get there, which makes the next one want to be like, it'll make it more impactful. It's weird to compare it to the hype beast world of like shoes and stuff like that, but if anyone's familiar with the way that shoes can sell, especially like something like a high brand like Yeezys, they're a popular brand of shoes. A lot of people have a disdain for those type of shoes, so I'll probably get heat for bringing it up, but they sell so crazily because they're really popular, but only like 200 are made available. If you do the same thing with AEW tickets, it would have been a struggle for some fans who can't afford that, but there is a market of fans who you see in the front row of almost every show or in that vicinity of every show who would have been able to pay this high market value for a 2,000 seat or a 4,000 seat arena rather than your 10,000 or 6,000 that you're trying to run and only selling out at 80% capacity because it was a good crowd. They did a decent sell, but you're going to come back again and it might not be bigger. It'll probably be smaller because everyone in attendance will see like, oh, maybe this wasn't as big of a deal around here as I thought.
Yeah.
And that's your biggest problem. I don't even think it's so much of a problem that rubs off on fans who are watching at home or anything like that, because, again, the crowd sounds great. But when you're there live in attendance and you see the whole other half of the arena isn't full, you kind of get this feeling like, am I at an event that is cool or not?
Yeah. It definitely gives off a bad vibe, and it doesn't look good for the viewing audience. No. Um, Again, I'm just gonna double down. I get what they're trying to do, but it's just not working.
Yeah, so I think it's just fair to consider running these smaller types of venues. And it was something that they had talked about early on when they were running amphitheaters and things like that, trying to do something different. And it would give a different type of feel to the venue. That's the one credit I'll give them to last week's venue, is it wasn't necessarily your typical arena. It looked a little different. Just the lighting was different. Everything was a little different because of where they chose to run. And that could be something that helps set them apart too. You don't have to run in these huge arenas that you're not filling and you're not packing out and you're not really giving compelling enough content on television to really draw in a hardcore new fan base. Because what would be that storyline that we've gotten right now? Maybe Cody and Max, but they really haven't put a whole lot behind that even thus far to be that hot feud that's going to draw people in.
Yeah, no, there's really nothing, like you said, there's nothing compelling to bring people in. And I mean, you have what, Jericho and MJ, or not Jeff, Jungle Boy, you have Daniels and Pentagon, you have, which is not really anything. You have Joey Janela and Sean Spears, which is, again, not really anything. And so, yeah, it's just MJF and Cody, and that's really not enough right now.
Yeah, and like people are always going to be entertained by that production and entertainment value and like those type of things that they're doing, but it's really those hot heated storylines that are have that realistic value to them that draw in your teenage fan base, which is a big fan base that they're trying to market towards.
Yeah.
And something that I think they really need to consider, like you need to get those blood feuds or those real life aspects to them going. And I know that Cody and Max is supposed to be that, but with them consistently pulling off into these other areas with each guy, it kind of dampens that a little bit, especially something that felt so important. But nonetheless, I mean, the ticket sales don't affect us personally. I'm not someone who lives and dies by the business of their business, but it's worth noting, seeing that there are some things that they need to make changes on going forward, and hopefully they're realizing this and not just going to stay doubled down on the thought process that some of these areas are just not going to sell out in, because they aren't selling out necessarily anywhere. Any of the shows they have lined up, I think outside of the Florida show, which I think is back in that amphitheater in Daly's place, if I'm not mistaken, everything else is not necessarily sold out and struggling to sell. So due to that, they need to make considerations on changing something, because it doesn't look good, and it's not our problem. It doesn't do anything to affect us, but it does make the company itself look kind of bad when weekly we're getting these pictures on social media of just empty halves of the arena, not just the upper deck, which you can tarp off the upper deck, but when you're looking at the whole half almost of the arena, it's kind of a little bit disheartening. And it's tough for the competitors too, man. You've got to look at it from that aspect too. If we're doing this for 3 months and you're a Janela who's used to working, granted small indies, but they're always packed and the crowd is always totally hot for you, and now you have to work a half of the arena that's empty every week, that takes a toll on your athletes as well.
Yeah. And it's kind of disappointing to see Cody doubling down that it's not a problem, rather than saying, hey, we'll work on it, or we're figuring things out still, just not even acknowledging it as a problem.
The one thing I'll give them is by saying that they'll run the area again doesn't necessarily mean they'll run the arena again. So they might be pleased with the turnout and the reaction of the crowd itself, and what might aim for something a little smaller in the area, which would make the most sense to me. And I do somewhat appreciate him making a reference to it. It wasn't like, oh, haha, that was before the show started or anything like that. He kind of had to directly say, like, yep, that's where we're at, but this is the realistic number of it or whatever.
That's fair.
But I didn't. It all just is a little disappointing, and like I said, from the biggest problem it will bring, I think, will be the effect and the impact it has on the talent. And Cody has to know that. He has to know from working many loops of a SmackDown house show tour or things like that it takes a toll on you to be working a whole half of an audience that isn't even there.
Yeah.
But despite the rough numbers for their sales of tickets over the past couple of weeks, in just 8 months, AEW has produced 16 live events, managed to sell 91,000 tickets, so an average of almost 5,000 tickets per show. This average obviously going to be skewed by the couple of pay-per-views that did roughly 10,000 each, but outside of that, this is still a good number, something that they are anticipating to go over 100,000 within the close of the year, just with the additional shows they're adding and last-minute sales throughout the last 2 weeks of the year. So something to hang their hat on, be proud of. 5,000 per show is a comfortable number, and if they can match the venue to that number, they'll be doing a lot better.
I think the big thing to take note of is they're usually not doing much worse than the WWE shows, the big WWE, like Raw and SmackDown, and so it's not a huge thing to go, oh no, AEW is dying, or oh, they're not delivering, because it's about the same. So it's not the biggest fire in the world that they have to put out. It's just something worth noting.
Yeah, it literally doesn't impact much, and like you said, they're doing almost relative numbers to the bigger company that's running in the area, with WWE having just a more established resume and years of being around, so that's a great sign. But you just want to see like something aesthetically pleasing, I guess, is the biggest way to put it. And when you can't really focus on a whole half of the arena, that kind of sucks, because you can, as someone who's viewing and knows that this kind of thing is going on, you could tell, especially with certain entrances and stuff, we're keeping our way off of that side just because of this. But nonetheless, it's good to see like they have great sales throughout the year. Ticket sales have been something to be happy about. Be proud of, and hopefully they can continue to work a good average like this next year. It's something that it will be worth paying attention to in 12 months when we're right back here in this same time. Is were they able to really build on that, or at least maintain that 5,000 average? Because again, these numbers are skewed by those big shows that did 10,000. They're running in Chicago again, and that is a different venue. I think it's still around a 10,000 seat venue. I don't remember entirely off the top of my head, but I think it might be a little bit smaller. So they might, and granted, they have that fan base still. I don't know if they're going to do a pay-per-view next year that does 10,000. You really have to, because it's lost that honeymoon feeling, that new show feeling. Like, can they draw that again?
I don't know. That's a good question that we're going to have to find out. But as of right now, I would say they can do it in the foreseeable future, but down the line, 12 months from now, I don't know.
Yeah, so, and that was something that I wanted to talk about with you as well. AEW obviously running their Revolution pay-per-view in Chicago in February, at the end of February, but instead of doing it at the Sears Center, they're doing it at the Wintrust Arena. Nearly the same capacity, about 10,000 there as well. Just looked it up. I just wonder if it was a matter of like scheduling conflict with Sears Center, something already going on perhaps, which would make sense. But I just wonder, like, their desire to get back to Chicago was heavy. You could tell because they have that relationship with the Sears Center, ran there 3 times, been consistent at their drawing power there. Obviously want to run there that weekend, want to be in Chicago that weekend, and they want to be there so bad that they're willing to do the win. And maybe it's just because they wanted to be teamed paired up with C2E2, because I know that it's sort of a collaborative event going on through that. And maybe this is the venue that C2E2 could provide to them. But it is worth noting they went out of their way to be in Chicago. And it had to be Chicago because they were willing to sort of turn their back on a venue that put them on the map in some ways, you could say.
Yeah, one would assume it's because of C2E2. I don't know what else it could be, because I don't know why you go back to Chicago other than C2E2. Would it not make sense with your show called Revolution and you haven't been to New York to do this pay-per-view in New York?
That would make sense. I'm there with you. I can see them pushing it as the fact of, well, this is where our revolution started in Chicago, so we're going back to where the revolution began. In Chicago, to me, it just screams the fact that they know that's their one market that they're guaranteed to pull a good, solid, like maybe even sellout crowd. For Chicago fans, you got to be living the life, because you're getting so much wrestling, and it's been so oversaturated that they can't even be charging an insane price at this point. Like, you could have gotten to all of these shows within the last 6 months for probably like $400, which is a ton of shows. So and decent seats for that price too. So it's just crazy to see. Like, for the Chicago fans, that's great. For fans who were hoping that they might be going to a different location, a little bit disappointing for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest thing is you've done 3 pay-per-views and now 2 of them will be in Chicago.
It's kind of mind-boggling how much they're hitting Chicago. I don't really get it. I understand that they have deep ties with Chicago. I understand C2E2 is going to be there, but Chicago is not the only place in the world where you can draw a definitely good crowd. Like I said, New York, or you can go to Philly, but even though they did Philly, and you could even go
to Cali and somewhere on that West Coast area that all of these, half of this roster got their big
would shop
push to
at the
fame.
bit for a big show in California.
I mean, yes, exactly. Anything like that, even if you're running a small amphitheater in LA, something like that. Because I think that the biggest thing that is frustrating to me is Khan made it pretty evident that they were going to run Chicago for All Out 2. So that to me leads the idea that we're going to get 2 more Chicago pay-per-views next year technically. The February one and then the one later on in September. So again, half of our pay-per-views next year will be in Chicago. We have done 2 big events this year in Chicago. It just seems, I get it. I get the fact that Chicago is a money market for them. It's done really well for them. You're kind of milking your one spot dry too by going to the well. It will be 4 times in basically a year's time.
Yeah. Like you said, it's going to be oversaturated. It already is oversaturated, but to the levels they're running these shows, what it's going to be is it's going to be to the point where people aren't going to be going to these shows as much, or the only people you're going to get are people who are coming out to go to the shows and people who are local to Chicago who can just easily go to them. But not everybody's going to make 2 trips to Chicago in a year.
Yeah, and I think this show will be a telling sign for them. The winter months, having people come out to Chicago once again, I think that it'll be interesting. The last AEW, the Dynamite show that they ran in Chicago, it struggled a little bit, but they had the comfort of sort of blaming it on the recent string of WWE shows that had happened that prior weekend and week.
Yeah.
So that was fair, but now we're running our own pay-per-view there. You have to produce decent to good results, just because that's your spot. You've made it clear this is almost your home ground, your main spot to draw. And if it doesn't draw well for a pay-per-view, if we're not looking at a 8,000 seat sellout, it'll be a problem.
Yeah,
and that's your market. That's your main spot. So, yeah, you're going back to where you can draw well and you should do a good number, but if you don't, it's going to look even worse, and it's going to be an even bigger uphill climb from there. You're going to see that you maybe should have been reactionary and made a couple of changes to what you've got going on.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't say it better.
Yep. But that really wraps up the news for this week. Again, not a very big news week, so not to even say that we wanted to harp on attendance figures and ratings for 20 minutes, but that's really all there was worth talking about outside of them announcing that opener. Let's go ahead and talk about this week's Dark card again. AEW Dark airing tomorrow, being taped last Wednesday. I'm going to just probably preface every one of these conversations with me saying I hate the scheduling of Dark until they officially change it, because it just bugs me so bad. But then let's go ahead and start with the opening match for this week's AEW Dark. We have Private Party taking on SCU. Who do you got winning this one, AJ?
I'm going to guess SCU, or I would hope to God.
Yeah, it would be an interesting way to maybe set up a potential triple threat, though, for Private Party, SCU, and the Young Bucks. I mean, I would actually kind of like that and appreciate that type of setup to really push people to be like, hey, maybe you should have watched Dark so you could see this. But realistically thinking, I don't really see that being the case. Private Party fell off the tag team rankings this week, something we'll go over here after we run down these 2 cards, but just that fact alone would lead me to believe that they probably were not victorious on this week's episode of Dark. We also saw Britt Baker take on local wrestler Machiko. Not too familiar with Machiko, so I'm probably going with Britt here. How about you?
Yeah, same there. I don't know Machiko, but I'm sure they're going to do a fine job.
Yeah, sure. Just a good, quick, short match to maybe elevate Britt, make her stand out as a top star. We also have Chris Statlander taking on B. Priestley. This is one I'm really interested in. Probably one of the bigger reasons I'll tune into Dark this week, just because I like Dark. I like Chris. I like B. They're both really talented women, both fresh to me and somewhat fresh to the wrestling scene in general. So this should be a good one.
Yeah, I have to assume Chris Statlander is winning since we have the Britt Baker-Chris Statlander match, which I kind of wish they, again, announced later. But regardless, it's going to be a good match. This is something I'm excited for.
Yeah, and honestly, in my perfect world, they kind of book it a different way where we're setting up Chris versus B as the number one contenders match somehow, and book and elevate Brie a little bit more. That would honestly have been more beneficial, I think, for the whole women's division to elevate two new faces more to that upper level rather than just re-elevating Britt along with Chris. I also think that Chris sort of comes off as more of a face, so transitioning to Chris versus Britt Baker will sort of be like a face versus face style match.
Yeah, it'll be. You're right. It's going to be face versus face, which is going to be not bad. It'll be a fine match, but it's not what you want to see. B. Priestley could be such a good top heel, and they're really not utilizing her that way.
Yeah, so nonetheless, should be a good match, interesting match, but I'm with you. I see Chris taking the win, something I'll talk about more during the rankings as well. And then in the last match worth talking about for Dark, we have Pac and the Hybrid 2 taking on the Best Friends in Orange Cassidy. Looks like a good little feeder match for potentially Pac, but honestly, it could go either way. The way they've been pushing Trent and Chuck, just the Best Friends as a whole, really could be an interesting main event.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Like you said, it's probably going to be a feeder match. I'll go with Pac and Hybrid 2, but overall, it's going to be fun. It's going to be really interesting. And it's going to be interesting seeing Orange Cassidy actually be in a match. I think this is the first time he's wrestled since he's been in AEW.
Yeah, maybe.
Aside from the Battle Royal, I think.
Yeah, I think he definitely appeared in the Battle Royal. Maybe has appeared in another 6-man or two, but not a whole lot of showcase for Orange Cassidy at all, really, in terms of wrestling, despite being as popular as he is. So we'll probably see some more of that on this week's episode of Dark. But a good main event there. Let's go ahead and talk about this week's Dynamite card, because for it being the last episode of the year, they really went out of their way to provide a really sweet card, a card that I'm looking forward to watching the show and then discussing the show itself afterwards with you. We'll go ahead and just talk about the two women that we just talked about on Dark. Britt Baker taking on Chris Statlander in a number one contenders match for the Women's Championship. This one is one I'm really excited for. Chris, as I've stated, has really been impressive. Britt Baker, this is a chance for Britt. This is something I called on Adam Page to do a couple of times in his matches with MJF, and it wasn't necessarily that he did or did not deliver in that aspect. I would say it almost was a moot point in general. But this is Britt's chance to show that she can work with someone who's a little bit greener, a little bit new to professional wrestling, and showcase a great match, a good to great match. And I think that's the most important thing here.
Yeah. I think Chris Statlander is amazing. I don't see her winning. If she does, I'll be really happy. I want to get that out of the way. But I expect Britt Baker to come out on top in this. Like you said, this is really a showcase for Britt Baker to see how well she can do with somebody who's been in the ring for 2 years now. Even though Chris Statlander is a cut above the rest in comparison to people who would be wrestling for that amount of time, she still is a little bit more green, like you said.
Yeah, so this one is really like one of those prove it to me type of matches where Britt could really almost elevate herself up and get that stigma of I'm not too sure about her off of her, where I can really double down and say, yeah, I think Britt is going to be the future of this division. This is one of those matches where you could see it. I think I'm with you that I don't think that Chris will win, but I think a Chris win is how you build a new face in professional wrestling. You have someone who fans are like, I don't think she's going to win, but she's a believable winner, so you let her win. I would be genuinely excited as a human being or as a fan or a person of, like a fan of professional wrestling. If she won, I would be like, oh, crap. Like, this is awesome. The same way I was when she won against Hikaru Shida. So I
Yeah.
think that's a good way to build up someone like Chris, and you really could continue to elevate her rather than almost like the Private Party situation where they elevated them momentarily and sort of shut it back down as a way to elevate other people. I think you go with Chris here. Give her a shot.
I would love it if they did. I'm hoping they do, but we'll see.
Yep, and then we also talked about the opening match for Dynamite, the Lucha Brothers taking on Kenny Omega and Hangman Page. Omega and Hangman building up a little bit of a story there between these two. I'm interested to see where it goes. These two, Hangman obviously just sort of trying to get a win at all costs and stealing the pins from Omega, so building up to that potential heel turn that people are expecting from Hangman since leaving the Elite.
Yeah, and I didn't notice it until I listened to The Observer, but apparently there was a lot in the match, and I went back and watched it, where Kenny Omega was going for hugs or high fives.
Yep.
Yeah, and he would just totally no-sell him, and I was like, oh my god, they're really going to build this to be like a big feud. Like, they're clearly booking this to go into Revolution, or I would think so anyways.
Yeah, and that one could be an interesting, real good feud. Something I'm excited to see, and something I would almost like to see them sort of cap off the year with. Let's close out this big show with this huge, like, brawl between these two, or even Hangman just turning on Omega and leave us going into next week again, like I've talked about, just wondering what the hell's going on, and the following week starting to get our answers and a real reason to make people tune into the show the first of the year. An interesting match, though, nonetheless. Lucha Brothers really popular as well, so this could easily be a case where Omega and Hangman lose and Hangman snaps. So,
that's honestly what I'm thinking is going to happen. I think they're going to lose, and Hangman's just going to form with a clothesline.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely something we could see, especially with, again, the idea that we haven't really gotten an announcement on the records being reset, so not something I'm anticipating at this point anymore. So because of that, I think that, like, in some cases, if they were going to reset, I think who wins and who loses on this last show would be really important. At this point, I don't think it's as important because you're clearly not resetting. I think resetting at this point would be bad because you haven't explained it, haven't given it any time for an explanation. So, yeah.
I'm guessing it's going to be at Revolution when they do or after Revolution that they do the reset.
Yeah, at this point, I have no idea. I have no reason to speculate when it will be. I would assume it will happen. I just assume it'll be to establish more of their WrestleMania type of show, which is a fair idea, and I think maybe even a better idea than resetting at the beginning of the year, because how else do you really establish that to your fans that this is our big show? Like, we go into it, and then after that show, we reset. So I think that's fair. I'm not going to critique them too much on not doing it. I would just critique the fact of whichever of the Young Bucks went on social media and said it, like tweeted it out that they were planning on the end of the year. Just say that you're going to do it at some point. Don't put a date on it, because then you really leave people who are paying attention confused. Because I get that probably only reached like 100,000 people who actually watch every week, but those 100,000 people are probably a lot like me, where they're like, so is this going to happen or no?
Yeah.
And then speaking of the Young Bucks, they will be taking on SCU for the AEW World Tag Team Championship. I don't know. I honestly don't know who will win this one. I think that the Young Bucks could win. I want to see SCU retain, just because I think it will do a lot to elevate their potential reign. A loss here makes the reign just lackluster and meaningless. It kind of you can either go one way or the other, and you're elevating SCU or kind of pulling the sheet out from underneath them.
I think it's got to be SCU for that reason, because they've had one title defense. They really haven't had any tag matches. It's got to be SCU. You can't have them lose. You would just be killing all their heat if you took the titles off them now.
I could see the theory, though, of the fact that they're going to continue to make the Young Bucks a focal point, and that has almost been an issue with the tag team division, because they're not champions and they're not feuding with champions, so that's hurting your championship because they are not necessarily a focal point. And rather than make the championship a focal point, I think it's easier for them to just say, well, if we put the titles on the Bucks, then the titles will always be focused on. just because it's very clear that they haven't put that focus on the tag team champions in the division. Yeah, they've sort of made more of a focus on tag team wrestling in general, but from day one, they haven't done very well at elevating potential tag team champions or new tag team champions outside of the Bucks themselves. So
I don't know. I still think that there's just no chance in hell that the Young Bucks come out on top in this. And if they do, I'm going to be actually mad.
yeah, and I think that's one of in this case, this match leaves me on the other side of if SCU wins, I'll again be legitimately happy just to see hopefully Scorpio get another important pin for himself within the year of 2019. I could also potentially see some funny business happening here to maybe set up a triple threat down the line with Proud and Powerful or something involved as well. And I wouldn't even necessarily hate that, but this is a chance to elevate SCU and give them an important win. Let's do it now. Let's stop toying around with SCU because they haven't looked the best. And even if they beat Private Party tomorrow, that doesn't do a whole lot.
My crystal ball is telling me Lucha Bros are going over, and they're going to look really good, and they're going to shoot up in the rankings, and then SCU is going over, and we build SCU and Lucha Brothers because we have Chris Daniels, who's still hung up on Pentagon Jr., and they're still a factor in this whole thing. So I think it's going to be SCU, and if it's not, I'm going to be baffled.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And again, I can sort of see the theory behind making the Bucks the tag team champions, but that's lazy booking because you're saying, like I said, you're essentially saying you can't put that emphasis on your champions the same way you put your emphasis on the Bucks, because that's really what this division is. It's the Bucks division with another team as champions who have not gotten nearly as much recognition. Yes, Scorpio got a little bit of time there for a couple weeks, but that was as a solo thing, really didn't do a lot to elevate the tag team itself. And that match Scorpio had was against Chris Jericho, and we're sort of seeing a repeat of that this week. Chris Jericho taking on Jungle Boy, another person that people really don't think should be matched up against the champion in the champion's final match of the year. A match that was booked and set up really awkwardly. Not the best way that I think they've done things within AEW. A good match on paper. It's something that they've done to make me excited for over the last couple of weeks, but people will constantly have the issue with this match, I think, because of how it was announced so awkwardly and people were unsure if it was going to be a championship match or what the deal was there. And I think that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and that made it an issue for some fans.
I'm still really excited for this match. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see what happens with Jungle Boy, but I agree that it has been a confusing ride to get there.
I can't wait to see it. I'm excited for the match too, but ever since I was talking about earlier on in the show with attendance figures and ratings and how we thought they were going to set themselves apart and be something different. This is kind of a prime example where they're not. The first thing that popped into my head after I said that was Jungle Boy, who's 0-8, going up against the champion in any matter. I get it could be a feeder match to make Jericho look good, but at that point Jericho should just stomp Jungle Boy. But you don't want that either. It's just, in terms of the booking, it's weird, and it's the second match on this card that has weird booking when you're comparing it with rankings. Like Britt Baker and Chris, it makes sense after dark when people get the results of that, because you're assuming both of those women win their matches on that respective show. But leading up to that point, there's no reason to believe that they should be in a number one contender's position. So it was like they worked the rankings into their storyline rather than working a storyline around the natural rankings. This is kind of that. Again, you're trying to force this Jungle Boy match, and then potentially make him a contender or something down the line off of a win here. But it all just sits really weird with me. I love the match itself. It's a great match, but I think in terms of trying to build new talent and be an alternative, they really, really, really should have built Jungle Boy up as like a force for the last 8 matches. He should have won them all, not against even good opponents. It could have been all job matches, all just elevation for him. Never mentions Jericho. Jericho never mentions him, and then they're set up against each other, and then it's something really important and has like a legitimate feel to it, rather than just feeling like another way of booking a WWE match.
Yeah. It's gonna be awkward because I don't know. You could have had so many people go into place of Jericho or Jungle Boy, and honestly, it still makes the most sense that it should be Pac, but it's not, and it's just a little odd because he has no reason to be in the position he's in. But nonetheless, I like the match just because I like Jungle Boy.
It's one of those things where if it was like a PWG style show where the match is just pieced together out of nowhere and has no
Yeah.
storyline benefit to it or anything like that, it would be so much more digestible as a fan. But as someone who really wants to take this seriously and really wants to see an alternative, you don't really want to see this being the way that the alternative is presented. And then if Jungle Boy does win, does he then shoot up the rankings? Above people who well at 0-8 still, yeah, you agree, but how far? And it leaves just a lot of, and it does, it's a storyline, it's professional wrestling, yes, I'm totally okay with that. But when I'm talking about a difference or something unique in wrestling or doing something different to set yourself apart, this was a real opportunity to do that, where you make your rankings mean something. You don't just have rankings for no reason, and that's what it feels like in a lot of these cases, especially this one where he's totally just been nothing. So for Jericho to have done all of this has been weird, and it's the exact same thing he did with Scorpio.
Yeah, it's gonna be kind of awkward. But I don't know. I'm just excited for it, and I don't know. I don't have any reason to be excited for it. I don't have any reason to really defend it, and I'm not going to defend it. But I am going to say I like it, so I can't be that upset about it.
Yeah, and I like I said, I agree with you there, and I'm almost right there with you. Where if it was a PWG or just a random match thrown together, like this is gonna be cool, this is gonna be fun, and I'm still excited for it. Really excited to tune in. This is almost a show full of matches where I'm gonna be rooting for someone. I'll be rooting for him. I want him to win, but I would have been rooting for him so much more if it had been done with a little bit more purpose behind it.
If they had just given him some wins, even leading up to the match on Dark, I would have been like, I would have had more of a leg to stand on to say, well, here's why it's okay. But they took him off anything up until this match.
They at least with Britt Baker and Chris Statlander, they utilized Dark to do that, to build that story, to tell that story. Whereas in this case, they didn't. It was like essentially just like, and I get it, it's not a title match, so there's really no reason that Jericho wouldn't want to fight someone who has never won. Like it makes enough sense, but it's just not that compelling of a story when you look at how it's been built. Whereas if they had built it a different way, it would be much more compelling, much more interesting. People would be much more behind it. So it's not the end of the world. Definitely interested to tune in. Can't wait for the main event itself. I really hope it delivers in many different ways, and I hope that it's an exciting finish. So
yeah, me too.
With all that said, that really wraps up the match cards. Let's go ahead and talk about this week's rankings from AEW. We'll go ahead and just start with the men's rankings because I don't believe there was really much of a change. Once again, we have Moxley at 1, Omega at 2, Pac at 3, Cody at 4, and MJF at 5. So really no rankings change here, no shuffle here, which is actually kind of refreshing, as we've stated in past weeks, because sometimes we see changes that feel really forced. But that said, I would like to see them building a little bit more of a singles guy, even a Darby or a Janela or anyone, even if it was Swagger or Jake Hager, I should say. Someone like that who could be moving up these rankings and be a fresh face in these men's rankings. And I admit that probably in a couple weeks I'll be excited to say that there will be someone new and fresh in there, but with them almost being stagnant for 3 weeks, you're just kind of like, let's bring in a new face. Let's build up Luchasaurus or Jungle Boy or Joey or Spears or Darby or anyone new to get on this list, because even outside of MJF, these guys have all been on this list every week, I would say.
Yeah, it's been getting tired, but I really want to see somebody like Darby Allin really start to get some wins as a singles competitor, because you don't have to be a top guy who's going for the title to be on the rankings. I think that's kind of silly. You should have, if you're putting people in mid-card spots or upper mid-card spots, they belong on these rankings just as much. It's whoever you're focusing on, I feel like, should be showcased here.
And what's most troublesome to me about it is when I start talking about bringing new faces in, I can admittedly say that there's no one I can think of off the top of my head who should be there based upon their booking. That doesn't say that I think that they've booked it right, because I think at this point you should have booked new faces who people could be like, well, why isn't Jack Evans on there? Or why isn't Darby? Or why isn't Kip Sabian? Like anyone. Pentagon, Christopher Daniels, anyone. Build someone up with a string of wins to actually make an appearance on this list, or at least make me wonder or argue that they should be on this list, because I'll give it to them. Their list is fine because there's no one else who should be on it, and that's their fault.
Yep. Yeah.
So, the women's list did change. The rankings for the women's division definitely got a shake-up. My biggest complaint here is that they expect fans to just be okay with the fact that Dark happened on Wednesday.
Yeah, I hate that.
The rankings come out on Friday, and Dark shows up on YouTube on Tuesday.
I hate that so much.
I hate it too. It's just ridiculous. It's essentially asking your fans to either look up spoilers or not look at your rankings until Tuesday, and which I guess is fine if you just assume that no one looks at just release your rankings on Wednesday morning then. If that's what you want to do,
Couldn't you? It's not like you have to. It's not like it matters, right?
And then you obviously, they reference them every week on Dynamite anyway, so then you have more of a reason to reference them, like these, the new rankings from this morning, let's talk about it really quick, as opposed to the rankings from Friday that are based off the show that happened last Wednesday that you have to, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out at this point, but they definitely didn't explain it to anybody either.
I just don't understand the logic in spoiling your own matches, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest point, is it is essentially spoiling your own matches. Why this is, you might ask? Well, Britt Baker in at number 1 after probably winning on Dark this week. Chris Statlander at number 2 after probably winning on Dark this week. And why else would they move over Hikaru Shida, who is now sitting at number 3? So it's the only thing that makes sense. It does make sense, but it's just the way that you put out your rankings, like either put out Dark on Fridays or Thursdays, or put out your rankings on Wednesdays, because make it more like, make it line up more, make more sense in scheduling, because it makes the way you schedule it right now makes no sense, and it's worth complaining about.
Do it after Dark. That's fine. You can do it on that Tuesday night. I don't care.
Yeah, right.
Just
after
have
Dark.
it line up.
That would actually be pretty cool if you did like an After Dark studio show, sort of, maybe not totally ripping off the Fox show, but something like After Dark where you just have a couple of guys from the company come on and just actually express how they feel, and then run down the rankings and give their thoughts on it. And maybe that's how you incorporate guys like Taz or something who you want to use, or the Chris Van Vliets and all these other announcer types that they have hired. Give them Alicia Tao, all of these people you have under contract, do something like this, because it would be really interesting. And then it's a perfect slot to announce your rankings rather than on a Friday, and then expect people to know that it includes the last week's show. But it is nice to see Nyla at least falling down a little bit. I would actually have loved to see her just not be on here. With her suspension, you pull her off and you put Big Swole in her place. Big Swole beating Emi Sakura. Emi's in at number 5. So even if you have Emi in at 4 and Swole in at 5, you again have a natural matchup. A rematch easily set up. It doesn't have to be 50-50 booked then. You could just really elevate Swole with 2 big wins over Emi. So that would have been cool. I would have liked to see that. But otherwise, not a bad women's rankings.
No, it's fine. I agree. Nyla Rose shouldn't be on there, but aside from that, whatever. Also, something we forgot to mention, Vicky Guerrero is commentating on Dark, because we mentioned the announcers. But I just wanted to throw that in. But no, the ranking's not bad at all. It's just really annoying, and I'm not going to stop being annoyed by it.
Yeah, just the scheduling of it all. But I will give them credit for the Nyla Rose thing with her suspension and her being ranked. While I did complain about it, I think that they did a good job with it, because it made her a top contender without ever having to give her that title match yet. And you can now make her fall essentially all the way off the rankings and have to reclimb up again. But she already has that stigma of being a potential number 1 contender without losing it in a way of losing momentum. She was just suspended. So while I did have a problem with it initially, and I don't really love especially still Cody being ranked, because he can never win the title, I am okay with the suspended rankings right now. I do just wish that they found a way to incorporate Swole into these rankings, because Chris, after her big win, was able to crack the rankings pretty quick. Now,
Yeah.
granted, Swole, I think, has quite a few more losses on her record, so that might have been what hindered her.
Mm.
And then let's go ahead and talk about the tag team rankings. We have the Young Bucks in at number 1 after beating Proud and Powerful last week, so Proud and
Yep.
Powerful slides down to number 2. The Best Friends are in at number 3 after, well, I guess they might be successful in their match on Dark, would be my only reasoning behind why they would move up. The Lucha Brothers in at number 4,
Yeah, I guess.
and then the Dark Order slide in at number 5 after Private Party slides out.
Why did Dark Order rise up?
I have to say that's because Private Party lost on Dark, would be my assumption.
And they're number 6, I guess.
Yeah, Private Party would have
Or
been
were.
number 5 last week. Dark Order would have probably been number 6, so this is a way to
Okay.
slide them back in. But yeah, I'm there with you kind of in saying, like, I understand that a loss should maybe make you move down, but when you're not doing anything, should that make you move up? Maybe. I guess it's fine, but yeah, the Best Friends continue to sit at number 3. I think it just proves the point that they haven't done enough with the rest of the tag teams in the division, because you can't really, again, make much of an argument for anybody. The Best Friends have probably been the number 3 tag team in AEW, or number 4 behind the Lucha Brothers maybe, but Trent has those wins over the Lucha Brothers, so hey.
Yeah. I'm fine with it. I'm not complaining, but yeah, the only thing I'm confused on is order, but I'm not even that confused.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
it makes sense with, again, Private Party falling out. The reason that I just don't love Dark Order being incorporated here is how much we've done to build them up. I would like to have just seen them naturally reappear on this rankings, but it's fine.
I agree.
It's a good way to reintroduce them to the rankings and then probably just have them go right up, because I would imagine we're going to see some type of culmination of that story on this week's show. It's
Yep.
not a really good idea to not really pay off on stuff right now and then make people wait 2 weeks for it. Something like especially the Dark Order or even the Hangman Page thing that you've been teasing quite a bit. Now is a good time to really wrap those things up.
Yeah, and you don't have to necessarily wrap it up as in the Dark Order bringing people in is done, but if any time for the Beaver Boys to join the Dark Order, it's going to be next week.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's at least one of the groups that they've been hinting joining the Dark Order. So a good story that they've been telling there. They've been doing a good job through those things. I think it's just, again, they're very surface level stories right now. Everything is very much on that surface level, and so it's feeling a lot of really entertainment-y rather than sporty or something new if fans were expecting that. But it's going to be a great week for AEW fans. This week's Dynamite is stacked from top to bottom, and I could almost imagine that there will be one more really interesting match tossed on that card just because they're good at doing that on Tuesday afternoons or Tuesday nights before the show. So nonetheless, a great card already announced, so I'm excited for that. Anything we forgot to add, AJ?
Some stuff happened on Being the Elite.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and run down the few interesting notes from this week's Being the Elite.
Well, like I was just saying, it looks like the Beaver Boys are joining the Dark Order. So we had Alex Reynolds getting talked down to by John Silver. John Silver telling him he's got to stop losing. He's looking like a joke. This isn't what he signed up for. Then Alex Reynolds takes the Dark Order flyer and pushes it onto John Silver. John Silver kind of walks off without saying anything with Alex Reynolds. So it looks like that's all but confirmed that the Beaver Boys are joining the Dark Order. Adam Page is being targeted with Dark Order ads. He was on his phone. He was drunk. He was in a downward spiral, and he's just kind of all messed up. Ever since he started drinking the vodka from Private Party, and he was trying to show them a video, and instead he had a Dark Order ad. Christopher Daniels can't get Pentagon out of his head. He can't stop thinking about his botch. They kept flashing that, and he said, I can't get this guy out of my head. I'm sorry, I have to go during a photo shoot, and then he just kind of rushed off. So Daniels and Pentagon not done.
So a nice little build to that story as well, so that's interesting enough. I'm interested to see where this Hangman thing goes, because I'm not sure how I would feel about him joining the Dark Order in reality.
It could have been a joke because they kind of played it off like it could have been just, oh, Dark Order, haha, but I'm not going to just brush anything being the Elite goes off.
Yeah, and another thing would be just how disappointing it would be to be building that on being the Elite only as opposed to your actual show. At least the Beaver Boys have been teased on television as well as being the Elite. What I also don't want to see here is the Beaver Boys, where it's the story of they're getting pushed to join, they're about to join, and then they attack the Dark Order, because that would make the Dark Order look like absolute garbage.
That would be
like
that would be the geekiest
two
geek
jobbers don't even want to join you and just want to destroy you. So I could definitely see that being the case. What I could also see being the case is them sort of tease that, them kill the Beaver Boys, and then somehow still incorporate Hangman into the story. Would be interesting. Not sure how it would work entirely, but I just don't want to see them mess that up with the Beaver Boys. And it's weird with it being both of them now being brought in, that I could really see it being like, this is how we establish the Beaver Boys and get a good storyline with them and the Dark Order going. And I don't know. I wouldn't love seeing the Beaver Boys be the heroes turning on the Dark Order.
I would definitely not love that. I would hate that. I would be laughing my ass off if they just made the Dark Order look like the biggest geeks on this roster. I'm hoping there's no chance of that, but now that you've said it, I'm not going to be able to shake it.
There's a good chance, and until they officially join, I could see that being the thing, or almost where they're always teasing it every week, like, are they going to turn on the Dark Order now that they joined the Dark Order? So
don't do this.
I hope that's not the story, because it would be okay with maybe someone who is a bigger star like Hangman, where he joins but fake joins the way Daniel Bryan joined the Wyatt family, and we've seen this story plenty of times in wrestling where it works. I just don't think it works with the Beaver Boys, who are very unestablished, so hopefully that's not the direction we're going.
I would hope not.
But nonetheless, that wraps up all of our Elite talk this week. AJ, go ahead and plug your social media.
You can follow me on Twitter at BigMatchAJ, and you can follow me on Instagram at AJTheFitzy.
And you can always follow the podcast on Twitter at All Elite Podcast. You can check us out on Instagram at All Elite Everything, and Facebook at Facebook.com/AllElitePod. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at All Elite Andy. Until next time, thank you everybody for tuning in. See ya.
Bye.